October 30th, 1969. Two young kids are riding their bicycles in the woods of North Carolina when they come across a dead body. Terrified, they immediately call for help. Shortly after, two cops arrive and start investigating the crime scene. One of them notices that the deceased is Chase Andrews, the son of a wealthy businessman. Surprisingly, there are no footprints around the area. The cops then notice a nearby tower and start climbing it, suspecting that perhaps Chase fell from there. Once they reach the top, they find a broken gate. This divides both of them. The first cop believes that Chase was pushed and killed, while the other thinks it was an accident. Sounds like the second cop maybe pushed and killed him, I don't know. In the next scene, the autopsy report of the corpse is out. It reveals that Chase indeed died of the fall impact, but something didn't quite add up. Based on his injuries, he should have been found facing downwards, but it was upwards. Hearing this, the cops immediately deduce that it's a murder. However, they don't have any evidence, not even fingerprints. Luckily, the doctor knows where to start. He gives them a tiny red fabric which he found on Chase's corpse. Later, as the cops are hanging out in a bar, they hear some people discussing the recent murder case. All of them think that a local girl named Kaya Clark is the murderer, as she had a bad history with Chase. With this information, the cops head towards Kaya's house. It is a small house located near a swamp. They look around and find a collection of shells and books. They also get their hands on a red cap, possibly the same cloth whose fiber was found on Chase's corpse. Meanwhile, Kaya can be seen hiding from them in the woods. At an opportune time, she tries running away, but the cops eventually catch up to her. They question her why she was running, but Kaya doesn't speak a word, hence she is taken into custody. Later, we see her locked up in a cell. A local lawyer, Tom Milton, shows up and inquires if she would be interested in his services. However, Kaya remains silent. It's almost as if she is hiding something very deep. Tom tries to persuade her by revealing that she is going to be tried for murder. A court hearing is going to take place soon, and it is certain that she will be found guilty. After all, she has a red hat that's more than enough evidence. Hearing this, Kaya becomes scared and finally opens up about her life. At first, she describes her childhood and the movie goes into a flashback. It is 1953 and Kaya lives with her 4 siblings and parents. At first glance, it appears as if they are a happy family, but the truth is exactly the opposite. Her drunkard father always punishes her mother for no reason. So, one day, having had enough, she abruptly leaves. Following this, all of her 4 siblings also left the house one by one. Now, Kaya is left in the care of her drunkard father alone. The latter raids the nearby swamp for mussels, a type of seafood. Kaya also tries her best to assist her father in work. Once they're done collecting for the day, they head to the local shop to sell it. The shop owner, Mrs. Mabel, is a kind woman who often provides Kaya with food and clothes. She even admits her into a school, but the little girl instantly becomes a target for the bullies. Hence, she runs away, never to come back again. As the days pass, she becomes more connected to her father, and he too starts being nice. One day, Kaya receives a letter from her mother, but since she cannot read, she asks her dad to read it for her. Unfortunately, as soon as he goes through it, he becomes enraged and yells at the little girl, "Your mom is not coming back." After this, the drunkard gathers all of her mom's belongings from the house and burns them. Little Kaya is deeply affected by the incident, but little did she know that this was just the start of her problems. The next morning when she wakes up, she finds that her father has also wandered off. Now, there is no one to care for her. Still, Kaya does not give up. She collects mussels from the swamp and sells them to buy things in return. Mrs. Mabel also helps her with groceries from time to time. Back in the present, Kaya gets a lovely dress from Mrs. Mabel, which she decides to wear for her first court hearing. The lawyer, Tom, suggests that she confess to the crime, but pretend that it was an accident. With this, she would get a maximum of 8 to 10 years in prison. However, Kaya asserts that she is not a murderer, so she wants to get out of prison as soon as possible. When the hearing starts, Chase's family lawyer does his best to prove that Kaya is guilty. He points out that no one else would have a better agenda to kill Chase. Kaya loved him a lot and wanted to marry him, but he always refused. This is probably why she called him to the tower and chucked him off. Hearing all of this, the crowd also starts turning on Kaya. They are sure that she is the murderer.
She loved him more than anybody. She had to be the killer.
Fortunately, Tom also turns out to be a good lawyer. He states that no footprints were found on the crime scene, so accusing Kaya without any evidence is unfair. Meanwhile, she goes into another flashback. It is the year 1963. Kaya has grown up to become a beautiful young woman. She still lives alone in her house and does everything by herself. Kaya has also developed a keen interest in nature, so whenever she's free, she simply roams around the woods and enjoys the tranquility. One day, however, someone leaves a beautiful feather for her. The next day, she receives another one. By the end of the week, Kaya has received several of these feathers, and also letters.
Somebody's out there killing birds somewhere.
Then, one evening, a guy named Tate Walker approaches her and reveals that he is the one who has been sending those presents. He inquires if she read the letters, and in a sad voice, Kaya replies, "I can't read." Thankfully, Tate is a nice guy who is always ready to help. He starts giving Kaya lessons on how to read and write. For the first few days, they meet in the woods and practice writing. Then, when Kaya becomes comfortable enough, she takes Tate home and asks him to teach whatever he can. Slowly but steadily, the smile on Kaya's face returns, and the bond between the two deepens. In the next scene, we get to know that Tate is an ambitious student who wants to get admitted to a top university. He has applied to a few and is awaiting results. One day, he asks Kaya if she would like to go to the city with him, but she declines. Kaya, who has spent all her life in the swamp, thinks that she doesn't belong in the city. Tate knows that she is not going to change her mind, so he gives up.
Oh man, I'll never be as cool as the swamps.
Some months pass by, and the two have now become a couple. They often make out in the woods and go for walks. One day, things get so romantic between them that they almost end up having intercourse. However, at the last second, Tate backs out, saying he doesn't want to harm her in any way. He fears impregnating her. I guess they've never heard of condoms out there in the swamp. The following day, Tate finally hears the news that he had been longing for. He is accepted into Dartmouth, his dream college. He immediately goes to share the good news with Kaya, but instead of being happy, she becomes upset. Tate mentions that he wants to do something with his life, and that going to Dartmouth is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. However, Kaya, who has never studied in school, thinks that it is a waste of time and money. She then runs away, saying,
All boys are the same.
For some days, they remain distant from one another, but on the final night before he leaves, Tate visits Kaya at her home and spends some quality time with her. The next morning, he explains that she knows literally everything that there is to know about the fauna and flora of the place. So, Tate provides her a list of publishers, saying she should write a book and send it to them. Kaya thanks him for this and asks if their relationship is over. In response, Tate promises that he will meet her on the 4th of July. With him gone, Kaya returns back to her monotonous life. However, now she has something to keep her occupied. As suggested by Tate, she has started writing books about the animals and plants of the region. A few months pass by and it's finally the 4th of July. Kaya arrives at the beach early in the morning to welcome Tate back. Unfortunately, even after hours of waiting, he doesn't show up. Kaya breaks down in tears, thinking that he has left her for someone else. Back in the present, the cop who initially investigated the case is called up to the court. Without further ado, he starts taking Chase's side and explains that there were no fingerprints or footmarks on or near the corpse. He believes someone erased them, cleverly. Tom counters by mentioning that the prints might have been erased to high tides, which are very frequent in the area. He then whips out a petition dating a year back, which writes that the tower is severely damaged. Anyone climbing it is risking their own lives. Hearing this, the entire crowd gets confused, and the case swings in Kaya's favor. Following this, the movie again cuts back to the past, this time to the year 1968. It has been several years since Tate left, so Kaya has already gotten over him. One day, she finds some government officials checking out her house. When she inquires with Mrs. Mabel about it, the latter replies that they are developers who are acquiring land to build hotels. This shocks Kaya, as she cannot even think of leaving the house. Hence, she gathers all the necessary paperwork of her house and submits it to the developer. It reveals that she is indeed the owner, but there is one problem. Kaya will have to pay off the pending tax, which amounts to around $800. Since she cannot earn this by selling shells, Kaya reverts to writing. After weeks of hard work, she finally finishes a book and sends it off to all the publishers from Tate's lift. One day, while at the beach, Kaya meets a handsome young man, Chase. They clearly notice each other but don't talk. However, the next day, when they meet again, Chase confidently asks her out on a date. Kaya, who hasn't been in a relationship for years, says yes immediately. In this way, the two kickstart a relationship and begin spending most of their days together. The smile on Kaya's face also starts to reappear. One day, she gets a reply from one of the publishers saying they are ready to print some copies of her book. The news elates Kaya, and when she shares it with Chase, he suddenly asks her to marry him. Kaya stares at him for a few seconds, then accepts. As a symbol of approval, she puts a seashell necklace around his neck. In the present, Chase's mother has arrived in court to give her testimony testament, she reveals that the necklace was not found around her son's body at the time of his death. So, she suspects that Kaya eliminated him, took his necklace, and then removed all the evidence. However, Tom mentions that they shouldn't come to a conclusion just because of a missing necklace. I don't know, it was a pretty dope necklace. Back in 1968 now, Tate finally arrives home after graduating from Dartmouth. Unfortunately, the very first sight he sees is Kaya spending time with another guy. The next day, while he is working at the dock, he overhears Chase talking bad about Kaya. He immediately confronts Chase, and the two get into a fight. Fortunately, they are soon separated by some other workers. That night, he goes to Kaya's house and explains that he couldn't come back because he was too focused on his studies. But now that he knows her value, he will never leave her. Tate also asserts that Chase is a bad person who likes playing with other girls' feelings. Sadly, Kaya does not believe any of this, so she just asks him to go away. Now, she just wants to be with Chase. Unfortunately, one day, Kaya learns that Chase is actually engaged to another girl. This breaks her heart, so she ends her relationship promptly. Everything is not bad for her, though. The next morning, Kaya gets the book that she had published, along with a check of $5,000. She will also have to attend an important press conference in Greenville. Kaya is over the moon to have earned such a large amount, so she quickly clears the house tax. With the remaining money, she renovates her house. Just when it seems like Kaya has forgotten about Chase, he shows up in her life. He tries to lie that he only loves her, but Kaya is not having any of that BS. She asks him to go away from her life, but Chase instead tries to force himself on her. When nothing works, she smashes him in the head with a rock. Before leaving, Kaya warns Chase not to bother her again, or else she will kill him. In the following days, she mostly stays hidden so as not to be seen by Chase. Finally, after a week, she heads to Greenville and attends the press conference. Back in the present, Tom tries to prove that Chase wasn't in the city when the murder took place. In fact, she was in Greenville, attending a press conference. Tom asserts that it is nearly impossible to board a bus home, kill a guy, wipe out all the evidence, and then return. At last, before concluding his speech, he just mentions that justice should be served. After a few hours, the judge finally comes to a decision. He says, not guilty. He also apologizes to Kaya for all the accusations and the time she spent in jail. In the next scene, Kaya reconciles with Tate, and the two get married. They start living happily in the swamp, doing the same work that they used to. After more than 50 years, Kaya passes away in her favorite boat. In the final scene, as Tate is going through his late wife's belongings, he comes across one of her older books. In it, a chapter reads, "Sometimes for the prey to live, the predator must die." After this, Tate finds a drawing of Chase and the same locket Kaya had presented to him. It is covered in blood, indicating that she did actually kill him.